Shadow Hack. Chapter 331, Northern Fisherman Village. The cistern of the Nine-Dragon Cave was one of the 9 paths. The bandits had used this place as a water source as well as a prison where inmates would be soaked in water. After walking 200 meters toward the depths, Li Yunmu's group reached the region where 10 or so convicts would be imprisoned in times past. These convicts would usually be ordinary villagers from within 1,000 miles who resisted the bandits. Once descenders occupied Nine-Dragon Cave, the pitiful villagers were freed from oppression and gained the freedom to return home. At that moment, the 4 sea devil monkeys were leading Li Yunmu's group of 3 on this path in search of something. Could the water prison have something hidden? As they got closer to the water prison, the 4 sea devil monkeys began to react quite strangely. They seemed both excited and nervous, as if facing a powerful enemy. The origin world was different from their Earth, since countless unknown beasts existed within it. The 4 sea devil monkeys nurtured by demon weren't ordinary, but had been transformed by divine blood. Moreover, because of the innate formidable strength of sea beasts, it could be said that the strength of these 4 transformed sea devil monkeys was actually comparable to savage beasts like 6-limbed ape gods. Each one of them was 5 meters tall and muscular, while also possessing an extremely berserk nature. But at that moment, they were acting as if they had encountered a powerful foe, so Li Yunmu's group also put up their guards. After they got close to the last water prison in the final row, the sea devil monkeys didn't dare to take another half a step. No matter how Demon tried to urge or command them, they firmly maintained their distance while shivering continuously. Li Yunmu took out a flashlight from his fluxer badge and flashed it a few times inside the water prison. It's strange. The 3 of them looked at each other. All of them sharing the same thought that if there was something in this water prison, then it was definitely in the pool of turbid water. This pool of dirty water wasn't more than 1.5 meters deep. Given how tall were the natives of the origin world, it at most reached to their chest. Clearly, a terrifying enormous beast couldn't be concealed inside. Then what was it that was causing the 4 sea devil monkeys to feel so much dread? I will go and take a look. Seeing the 4 sea devil monkeys not budging from their position, their master demon summoned the courage to go inside the water prison to investigate. A small pool of turbid water became frighteningly deep at this moment. Li Qinghong stepped forward and stopped him. Something isn't right. My bloodline instinct is telling me that there is a terrifying danger hidden here. Master, we cannot take the risk, this isn't the 5th dimension. We cannot touch this place for the time being. Li Qinghong rationally stopped the 2 people from taking any more actions. All right. Li Yunmu observed the water prison for a long time, but in the end didn't lose his reason and didn't let Demon proceed. If the instinctual reactions of the 4 monkeys wasn't enough proof, then Li Qinghong's response forced him to act cautiously. Seems like this place cannot be touched for the time being. We will leave immediately. Afraid that some change might occur, Li Yunmu, as the master, firmly decided to pull back. When they quickly retreated from the water prison and left this path, they didn't notice that the water pool in the depths suddenly began to boil. Moments later, 2 blazing pupils which resembled strong headlights appeared. Those blazing pupils seemed to be able to see through walls, for they stared at the position of Li Yunmu's group, which had already departed from the water prison, and began to follow their movements. After the 3 left the path, Li Qinghong's sensory power immediately became clearer, and she fiercely said, "Vo, I don't why but I feel like I've escaped a calamity. There is certainly a terrifying creature there. I don't why, but it doesn't seem to want to come out of there. I also think that this water prison is connected to the river flowing under the Nine-Dragon Cave. Maybe the origins of this cave aren't simple, but what a pity." Demon couldn't sense anything, though. He was like Li Yunmu who also didn't notice anything, even if he possessed keen instincts. But the more they couldn't sense anything, the more fearful they became. Given that Li Qinghong had reacted so strongly, the undying sage bloodline in her body must have sensed a mortal enemy or something even more formidable. Therefore, it could only react in Li Qinghong, causing her heart to palpitate. Her reaction was exactly like that of the 4 sea devil monkeys who relied on their bloodline instincts and were scared stiff before even reaching the pool. They lost all combat strength without anyone even showing up. Were the sea devil monkeys weak? Naturally no. Given their berserk nature, the only explanation could be that the creature inside the water prison far surpassed the level with which everyone could deal. Seems like we can only return later to check it out. Li Yunmu wasn't the least bit regretful. Originally, he had believed that the 4 sea devil monkeys had discovered some treasure of the origin world. However, even though there was probably a precious treasure here, the chances of them encountering a powerful foe were even higher. Li Qinghong took out large amount of explosives from her storage batch, and the 3 of them buried these explosives at the mouth of the path. They then stepped away and blew the cave up to collapse the entrance to the path that had just taken. In order to prevent others from accessing this region, the 3 of them had buried the explosives quite deeply, causing more than 100 meters of the path to collapse. This way, as long as somebody didn't have any particular matter down there, they wouldn't go to investigate the water prison. After this, the 3 of them rested for a while. Then, Li Yunmu calibrated the position of Blue Moon Island and inputted a dimensional stone within the transfer channel. The next instant, the 3 of them left the desolate region. When everyone opened their eyes once more, they saw that their surroundings were now completely different. Surveying their surroundings, they discovered that the region they were standing in was an empty plaza of another village. But compared to Liagia village in that desolate place, this one was very different, for it was full of vitality. This was a fisherman village next to the ocean. The whole village was very large and had close to 300 households, and Li Yunmu's group had arrived directly at the empty plaza at the center of the village. North of the village, there was a large ocean which disappeared into the horizon. The blue sky and boundless ocean with a faint wind that smelled of fish caused the 3 people to swiftly wake up. They hadn't sensed that during the teleportation they had taken a long time, so what did this imply? It was the distance. Things were even more distant from one another than they had imagined. On their Earth, the 3 of them had used transfer channels many times, but they had never fallen asleep during the teleportation. At the side of the transfer channel stood 2 people wearing leather armor and holding halberds. One of them said with curiosity, "Flux experts from far away, we welcome you to Blue Ocean's northern fisherman village. This is the territory of Blue Moon Island, how can I serve you all?" Chapter 332, The Enormity of the Origin World. Li Yunmu's group had been aware of the 2 guards from the start. Apart from them standing outside the transfer channel, the fisherman village also had several squads patrolling around, each one composed of 5 guards. Judging by the presence they emitted, not one member of theirs was weaker than the leader of 9 Dragon Cave. On top of that, they most likely had also cultivated a fighting technique. And this was just another small corner of the origin world. Just one coastside village possessed several tens of guards who had strength equivalent to the leader of 9 Dragon Cave. Compared to the small village where the descenders had first come, this village had a military force with terrifying strength. Furthermore, the fishermen walking around the village caused Li Yunmu's heart to skip a beat. This was probably the time when the villagers were returning from the sea, for one after another, several groups carrying their day's harvest were entering the village. They brought more than several tons of oceanic turtles, vicious fish with tusk-shaped teeth, and purple-scaled fish. Each of these purple-scaled fish weighed more than 100 catties, with plump fat growing all over their body. There was also an enormous beast fish which was more than 300 meters long and was as large as a small mountain, which required the majority of fishermen to carry it into the village. "Huge fish!" Demon exclaimed. Witnessing this scene, the trio once more realized just how different were the natives of the origin world from the ordinary people of their Earth. None of the fish were small. Being 2-3 meters in length, all of them were extremely strong and large. And there was also that enormous fish which required many people to move it. This fish almost gave a fright to Li Yunmu. When he first saw it, he almost believed that these villagers had caught a flood dragon. Flood dragons were powerful and savage oceanic beasts residing within the seventh dimension. Each of them possessed strength that could rival a flux sage, yet the fishermen here were cooperating to carry such an enormous fish out. It had two crude feelers at the top of its head and densely packed pointed teeth. The fish had 4 small limbs, so it was an exact match for a flood dragon, only missing dragon scales. But given its size, it may be even more enormous than a flood dragon. This is a savage ocean beast exclusive to our blue ocean. It is extremely savage in nature and often destroys our fishing boats. Today's harvest is pretty good, they even managed to catch an azure dragon fish, one of the guards explained. After conversing with them, Li Yunmu learned that the 2 guards were actually fishermen of the village. In fact, all the guards within the village constituted of the most powerful people among the fishermen who were then sent to Island Hall where they would undergo training for 3 months. Only after that would they successfully graduate to the position of the guard. It was as Li Yunmu had guessed. Although these guards were previously fishermen, they had undergone systematic cultivation and learned fighting techniques. The difference between their strength compared to the other natives of the origin world was like the disparity between cloud and clay. The system quickly analyzed the situation. It said that if these guards had cultivated 1 or 2 battle skills, even if they were the lowest class battle skills, Li Yunmu could only deal with a dozen people without using his azure dragon armor and flame thunder power. What concerned Demon, given his strength, these 2 guards could kill him, while Li Qinghong could probably deal with a small squad of 5. Li Yunmu was aware that the currency used within the origin world was silver sand coins. Thus, he took out a few silver sand coins and found a place to stay in the village, under the guard's reference. The silver sand coins were different from the ordinary silver found on their earth. They were formed of naturally formed sand at the depths of the ocean, which was filled with blazing light. They were necessary materials for properly casting weapons, so the people of Origin World used them as hard currency. From 9 Dragon Caves bandits, Li Yunmu's group had acquired 70 silver sand coins. This amount couldn't be considered as too little, but it certainly couldn't allow them to be called wealthy. If one used an ordinary family of 5 for an example, 70 silver sand coins would last them for roughly half a month. Li Yunmu and his followers could only blame the 9 Dragon Caves bandits for being too poor. Besides, with several descenders dividing the amount, it really didn't amount to much. Apart from this, it was said that within the depths of large forests filled with fierce beasts, a type of gold was formed. This gold was also used as hard currency by the people of the origin world. A coin of this secret gold could be exchanged for 100 silver sand coins. However, Li Yunmu's group didn't necessarily need large amount of wealth. After he paid 5 silver sand coins, the guards led them to a small house to settle down. With 5 silver sand coins, they could reside here for a month. This time, the trio once again experienced the enormity of the origin world. Although this world might lack in natural resources, it definitely didn't lack in land. None of them had expected that 5 silver sand coins would only be enough for one night's meal, but it would be enough to get them a house spread over 100 square meter area. This small house was made completely of wood, its base formed of thick tree stumps. It had the height of 10 meters, and its back door faced the ocean. There was also a wooden platform for fishing in the rear of the house. Apart from this, after finding a place to stay, they made repeated inquiries with the fishermen and gained some knowledge about the origin world. The origin world was a backward world. Perhaps this was the best description, because the origin world didn't have any developed science and technology and gave most importance to martial skills. This world was built upon strong preying on the weak. The land was divided into 4 main parts: the eastern region, western region, northern region, and southern region. As for how large exactly was the origin world? Even the eldest and most knowledgeable person in the village didn't know the extent of the origin world. Even after many generations, they hadn't yet been able to completely explore the North Blue Ocean's nearby region. In the end, it could be seen that this world was so large that even the natives weren't clear about its size. As for the transfer channel within the village, It wasn't for the use of ordinary natives of the village, but mainly to facilitate the flux experts of the origin world. And this island wasn't the Blue Moon Island which was Li Yunmu's objective, but a small island nearby. It was known as Azure Dragon Island. Its name was derived from the azure dragon fish, and the island was located at the most northern part of the land, within the ocean North Blue. Because of this location, all the nearby regions were administered by the Blue Moon Island. Therefore, the region under the jurisdiction of Blue Moon Island was known as North Blue. And in fact, traveling to the Blue Moon Island wasn't that simple. According to the elder, if ordinary people wished to enter the Blue Moon Island, they would have to fulfill a certain condition. This condition was that they had to be a flux expert of the origin world, otherwise, the Blue Moon Island wouldn't let them inside. As for the differences between flux experts of the origin world and fluxers from other Earths, this was something which Li Yunmu's group most wished to know. Otherwise, how could they learn the origin world's way to become a deity? Chapter 333, Society with a Rigid Hierarchy. Time continued to pass slowly in the fisherman village. As it went by, a month passed since Li Yunmu had come over. If his group wanted to enter the Blue Moon Island, they had to obtain the command tile of a flux expert which was similar to a fluxer badge on their Earth, which was used to prove one's status. Only after successfully becoming a flux expert would Li Yunmu get the chance to step on the Blue Moon Island. Otherwise, the people who were considered ordinary in the hierarchy of the origin world didn't have the qualifications to step inside the core headquarters of an administrating power. Li Yunmu's group of 3 continued to wait since they had no other choice other than remaining patient. There was still a month left before Blue Moon Hall would conduct its test to determine whether a person could become a flux expert. Thus, even if they were anxious, they could only worry helplessly until they were authenticated as flux experts. Around them, there wasn't only one fisherman village on the Azure Dragon Island but 4 of them. They were known by the inhabitants as Eastern One, Southern One, Western One, and Northern One. They weren't regarded as official names as this naming was simply based on their respective positions on the island. And presently, the location where Li Yunmu's group was staying at was the Northern Fisherman Village. Among the 4, it was the most powerful in terms of comprehensive strength. Apart from this, there was also a small town at the center of the island which was known as Azure Dragon Town. As told by the fishermen, the residents of Azure Dragon Town were a rank higher in the hierarchy compared to the fishermen who were on the lowest rung. Those who had the qualifications to reside in Azure Dragon Town were all large fishermen clans of the 4 villages. They had previously amassed extreme wealth and riches and thus had obtained the qualifications to reside in the middle of Azure Dragon Island. In addition, another group of residents was composed of immigrants. All of them had used large amounts of wealth to migrate there. It could be said that the residents of Azure Dragon Tower lived much more comfortable lives compared to the fishermen of the 4 villages. The majority of the townsfolk were landowners on the island. Azure Dragon Town had a large amount of fertile land which had fallen into the hands of large clans and landowners who grew many types of cereal, fruit, and vegetable, all of which were very expensive. If the fishermen wanted to eat these vegetables and fruits, they would have to use large amounts of seafood to exchange for them. After all, rare things were expensive, and in North Blue, the only thing which wasn't in shortage was seafood. The small town was also the only place on Azure Dragon Island where flux experts would come and go easily. The largest number of them resided precisely in the island hall. It was the place where all the fishermen dreamed of learning cultivation. It was similar to martial halls on Li Yunmu's Earth. This martial hall had flux experts residing in it, and they served as teachers there. As long as one had sufficient wealth or potential, they could enter the island hall and learn some fighter skills or deadly moves. That's right, this island's only martial hall wasn't a place for flux experts to cultivate, but a place where fishermen could learn fighter skills. The crude battle skills practiced by ordinary people were known as fighter skills among the natives of the origin world. Even those who had inferior aptitude and learned the most useless skills would be considered as glorious guards in their villages and would have higher status compared to the fishermen who belonged to the lowest rung in the hierarchy. The guards could also choose to remain behind in the small town as bodyguards for the landowners or protectors of large clans. Although it wasn't any better than being a guard, it would allow them to earn more money, which could make their lives more comfortable. In short, after probing around for more than 10 days, Li Yunmu's groups had gained an approximate understanding of the ordinary people of the origin world who truly had the lowest position. Although they were better off than slum dwellers on the group's earth, these fishermen and their like were living far worse than ordinary people from where the descenders had come. The origin world was a place with an extremely rigid hierarchy where the majority of people were divided in a few classes. The lowest rung was composed of the most ordinary people who couldn't be considered much different from the slum dwellers on the group's earth. But with endless resources, as long as these people worked hard, they would have enough food and clothing. Servants, civilians, bourgeois, officials. These classes described the hierarchy and power division in the origin world. Servants belonged to the lowest class, and they didn't have even the most basic privileges or any personal rights. The people who had lost in wars and conflicts as well as their descendants belonged to this class. Sometimes, certain criminals were also pushed down to this servant class. They were the same as slaves which were used on Li Yunmu's earth previously. Civilians were the most ordinary people, like the fishermen. There was nothing much to say about them, for they were weak and fragile like ants and moles. As for bourgeois, they had higher position and more privileges compared to the civilian class. The people of this rank also possessed a little freedom of speech compared to classes beneath them. If someone from this class was murdered, a certain amount of attention would be given to catching the culprit, unlike the civilians whose deaths were basically ignored. The safety and assets of bourgeois were also provided a certain amount of protection. Therefore, regardless of whether it were servants or the civilians, all of them had one goal in life, which was to struggle into the bourgeois class. The requirement to enter this class was to possess a requisite amount of wealth and assets. If any civilian amassed the required amount, they could apply to become a bourgeois. This requisite amount was roughly equal to 10,000 silver sand coins. In terms of strength, if a civilian had the power of 9 oxen and cultivated 1 or 2 battle skills, they could also become a bourgeois. It could be said that the dream of entering this class was precisely the thing for which the civilians and servants wanted to become physical flux experts. This kind of person was at the peak of 9 oxen's power and had also learned at least 1 crude fighting skill. The requirements to enter the officials class were even higher. Actually, this class was mainly formed of people rising up from the bourgeois class. The amount of wealth required to do this was 1 million silver sand coins or the possession authentic qualifications to become a flux expert. The people that belonged to this class possessed a certain amount of influence and power in the origin world. If someone possessed 100 million silver sand coins, they could apply to become a large clan. Flux experts whose strength had attained a higher level could also create their own clans. At the level of a large clan, the person could openly form what was known as personal power, but these still couldn't compare to the power held by cities. Therefore, they could only be called large clans. Once a person possessed the authority and had the right to form their own influential clan, they could naturally also form their own armed forces. Thus, the authority in the origin world was mainly in the hands of the people from the influential clans. In truth, they might not really be at the top of the pyramid, but it was definite that they were a community which possessed extremely great influence. Chapter 334, Endless Experience Points. According to the origin world structure, the present status of Li Yunmu's group was that of slaves. The reason behind them being automatically classified as servants was because they had descended from Earth. They didn't any proof of identity nor any tile that would prove their status. As long as a person didn't have this status tile, they would be automatically classified as people from the bottom run, which was no different from being a slave. If the group was discovered by anyone or captured, they would be classified as property of the person who found them. At that time, even their life and death would be in the grasp of their master. Naturally, no one within the fisherman village even considered that Li Yunmu's group of 3 might belong to the lowest rung. After all, they had come via a transfer channel. Only the powerful who were qualified could use transfer channels. Ordinary bourgeois class people had the most basic qualifications, but in any case, the fisherman didn't even dare to think about it. Li Yunmu had used a transfer channel which had been abandoned for countless years in an unknown desolate region, and not from one administered by an official organization. Otherwise, given that they didn't have any status tiles, no guards would have ever approved their teleportation. Therefore, the most important task for Li Yunmu's group was to obtain a status tile of the origin world. It was without doubt that if they just aimed to become physical flux experts, then as long as they underwent the inspection at the island hall, they would immediately gain the status of a bourgeois. For the fisherman, this was equivalent to reaching heaven in one step. But the thing that Li Yunmu wanted clarified the most were the conditions required to become a flux expert. Perhaps, all the descenders were facing this question at the moment. Next day at dawn, a hint of white appeared in the sky, but by then Li Yunmu had been awake for a long time. However, there was someone who had woken up even earlier than him, and it was Li Qinghong. After thoroughly refining the undying sage bloodline, her strength had rapidly progressed the past few days. Every day, Li Yunmu could observe her presence slowly changing. If she was allowed to consolidate her cultivation for another 3 months, she would become strong enough to contend on equal footing with Zhang Wei when he increased his strength twice, using Battle God's Blood and Battle Devil. She may even win a bout against him under these conditions. How many days has it been since Demon infiltrated the Azure Dragon town? Li Yunmu asked in the morning. Today is the 10th day. If nothing unexpected happened, he should rejoin us as we agreed, Li Qinghong replied without much thought. In order to avoid rousing the suspicions of the guards of the Azure Dragon town, Li Yunmu didn't have this whole group enter the town. For the sake of cautiousness, he only dispatched Demon to obtain some information. Demon was one of Sea God's people and had lived most of his life in the ocean. Moreover, he was also quite tall, so sending him to investigate wouldn't make anyone suspicious. Then we continue to wait. Li Yunmu hadn't expected that the vastness of the origin world would become the first problem confronted by the descenders. After a careful calculation, he realized that it had already been 9 months since the descenders had arrived in the origin world. No one could have thought that even after almost a year, they would still be only planning to infiltrate their targets. Fortunately, the transfer channels in the origin world were far more common compared to their Earth, to the extent that even an ordinary village of fishermen also had one. Otherwise, it probably would have taken Li Yunmu 8 to 10 years to reach Blue Moon Island of North Blue. After the two of them ate breakfast, they continued on with their usual life. Li Yunmu went to the backyard to fish, while Li Qinghong acted as a physical flux expert who had the power of 8 oxen and so joined the fishermen squads. These past few days, this was what they did all the time. Given Li Qinghong's strength, even if a part of it was concealed, she still quickly obtained the respect of the fishermen. With her power of 8 oxen, gaining their acknowledgement was a child's play. In the origin world, there wasn't much difference between men and women. So soon, this extremely formidable female obtained a fixed position within the fisherman village and had access to news about all sorts of incidents happening every day. Apart from this, she also pocketed many silver sand coins and quickly became the only person with some savings in the village. At least all the fishermen in the village thought so. If they learned that Li Yunmu had already amassed a mountain of corpses of savage sea beasts from North Blue, they would all be completely astounded. According to systems data based on fishermen's words about the value of materials and other sea products, mountain of corpses accumulated within Li Yunmu's heavenly world in the last 10 days was sufficient to allow him to become an official. The sea beasts eliminated by him in the past few days could easily sell for 100 million silver sand coins. Even if he didn't become a flux expert of the origin world, he could rely on this enormous amount of wealth to easily enter the officials class and gain a certain amount of authority within the origin world. This was his main asset in the origin world. Thus, during the past 10 days, every hour of every day, Li Yunmu used shadow hack. The group of shadows rampaged within the ocean, killing sea beasts. Naturally, each sea beast they killed far surpassed the ones killed by fishermen in terms of value and rarity. Thus, the eliminated sea beasts were put into Li Yunmu's heavenly world so that they wouldn't rot as time passed due to the sun's protection. As for how large North Blue was, Li Yunmu hadn't been able to find that out. After all, he could only access information from a trifling fisherman village filled with civilians. However, the territory controlled by Blue Moon Island was something he clearly understood. In comparisons of size, it was almost equivalent to half of the central continent. And this Blue Moon Island was reportedly only a third-rate power among the influential organizations in the origin world. After learning this, whether it was Li Yunmu or Li Qinghong, neither of them could speak anything for a long time. They simply couldn't imagine that a trifling third-rate power which barely had the qualifications to enter the influential clan was surprisingly in control of an area which was almost half the size of the central continent. Suddenly, Li Yunmu felt that humanity within this origin world was minuscule. Even those whose strength reached the level of quasi-deities and who were viewed as half-gods by the humans would feel tiny facing the vastness of the origin world. Ding! Congratulations host, after hacking sea beasts for several days, your experience points have reached 10 million, which is sufficient to congeal the 9th shadow. Do you wish to confirm? System's congratulatory message pulled Li Yunmu back from his daze. Day and night, the 8 shadows had been hacking incessantly. After a lot of time, Li Yunmu finally accumulated 10 million experience points. This was the first good news that he had heard after coming to the origin world. An extra shadow meant that his strength would increase to another level. Even if his flux energy cultivation had been delayed because of coming to the origin world, his strength would continue to increase as long as he continued hacking and congealing more shadows. It didn't matter if he could learn the cultivation system of the origin world since he still had a terrifying capital to rely upon. Li Yunmu smiled. This was the disparity between him and the other descenders which they would never be able to beat. Chapter 335, Turbulence in North Blue. Once the 9th shadow appeared, Li Yunmu decided to not give it a name. After all, it would be impossible for him to provide it with shielded nurturing to preserve its intelligence and battle awareness in the future. When his shadows died while hacking in the sea, Li Yunmu had to spend a large amount of experience points on their resurrection. At the moment, since the number of shadows wasn't substantial, he didn't feel much burden, but what about when the number of shadows increased? Given that the sea beasts of the origin world's North Blue were far more savage and formidable compared to those on Earth, his shadows had died over a dozen times during the last 10 days. This forced Li Yunmu to reach the decision that Li Yun, Li Feng, Li Tian, Li Dai, Li Mei, Li Lan, Li Ju, and Li Zhu would become his core shadows. Or well, the shadow bosses which he would nurture. As for the shadows congealed in the future, he would simply leave them on their own to grow and wouldn't spend experience points to resurrect their shadow spirits. Thus, Li Yunmu just named the new one Shadow 9. As for its appearance, Li Yunmu used his old template of age around 30, height 1.8 m, and weight 70 kilograms. Afterwards, he used a black mask to conceal the face of Shadow 9. In the future, all his new shadows would be established as genuine shadows. Apart from Shadow 1 to 8, all the others in the future would act as true shadows who wouldn't casually reveal themselves under the sun's light. After establishing the human model, a healthy adult covered in tight black clothes and face hidden beneath a black iron mask appeared in reality. Go, find Li Yun's group and join them in hacking. Li Yunmu waved his hand, and Shadow 9 woodenly entered the ocean to execute the latest command. Li Yunmu had to admit that the ocean of the origin world was a very convenient hacking site for the shadows. After they entered the water to hunt sea beasts, Li Yunmu didn't have to be worried about them being revealed to the world in broad daylight. Moreover, the ocean of the origin world had countless beasts. There were so many of them that simply couldn't be exterminated. But the most important thing was that for every sea beast killed, he gained more experience and ability points than ever before. This place was much more generous than the fifth dimension. On an average, one enormous sea beast would give him around 700 to 1000 points. This was the reason why Li Yunmu had been able to amass 10 million points within a dozen days. After all, not only were there plenty of sea beasts around, but they also provided ample experience points. For every beast killed, he would obtain around 7 or even 10 times more than after taking down a formidable dimensional beast in the fifth dimension. Although the sea beasts here were quite powerful, the 8 shadows could deal with them with relative ease once they joined hands. Unless they encountered a genuine sea beast tide, they would only die within the middle ocean layer. The oceans of the origin world were divided into 5 layers by natives. The region less than 1 kilometer below the ocean's surface was known as shallow ocean. Under usual circumstances, the stature of sea beasts there wouldn't exceed 10 meters. This was why natives mainly fished in these waters. Only the sea beasts and giant fish of the shallow sea were relatively weak and unthreatening. Below 1 kilometer but less than 5 into the sea was the mid-sea. The shoals of fish and enormous sea beasts here were relatively more threatening. The natives wouldn't dare to dive in this place to hunt sea beasts because the organisms in the mid-sea were comparatively more dreadful. A dozen meters large savage fish and sea beasts were considered the smallest in mid-sea region. Some more formidable ones reached 30 meters and some even 70 meters. If Li Yunmu only had one shadow, he wouldn't be able to hack at this depth because the origin world's North Blue possessed countless formidable beasts of many different kinds. God only knew how many terrifying species were present in the origin world. If one thought about it, just a third-rate power like Blue Moon Island had a territory equivalent in size to half of the central continent. And it was just one of the several hundred others in the North Blue. From this, the size of the entire North Blue could be clearly seen. According to the system's estimation, North Blue was approximately the size of 70 Earths lumped together. And this was just a conservative estimate based on the little information they knew about the North Blue. If a proper comprehensive calculation was done, then the area might show up to be even more terrifying. If North Blue was so large, then the amount of organisms and resources within the ocean could be imagined. Mid-sea was frightening, but the following deep sea was even more terrifying. From below 5,000 meters to 30,000 meters, it was considered to be the territory of deep sea. As a matter of fact, this region was an extremely terrifying existence within the ocean. Fortunately, the sea beasts here didn't usually leave their territory. Thus, unless someone stepped into their territory, they wouldn't come up to shallow sea or mid-sea. Li Yunmu had previously ordered Li Feng to infiltrate the deep sea, but just as he went below 9,000 meters, he was swallowed by an enormous sawfish which was several hundred meters large. And this terrifyingly enormous sawfish hadn't even been particularly targeting Li Feng. In reality, it had been just casually swallowing water when the resulting whirlpool sucked Li Feng into its stomach. Henceforth, Li Yunmu didn't allow his shadows to go to the deep sea. Below deep sea was deep ocean, which extended from below 30,000 meters to 100,000 meters. It was said that each beast living in this region possessed enough destructive power to overturn the seas and rivers. The people of the origin world called the sea beasts of deep ocean devil sea beasts and revered them as devil deities. There were very few sightings of devil sea beasts. They were legendary existences for ordinary people, which was a fortunate thing. After all, the appearance of a devil sea beast would mean disaster for the residents of islands. Deep ocean was extremely terrifying, but out of expectations, below 100,000 meters, there was an even more frightening region that's been scouted by humans. This region was known as Ocean Core. It had a very peaceful name which didn't seem the least bit frightening, but no one spoke about it. All the people of the northern fisherman village mentioned was that the organisms there didn't possess the appearance of monsters. According to hearsay, Ocean Core was the deepest region which humanity had been able to reach in the past 30,000 years. Chapter 336, Descenders from Other Planes. It was unknown what was under the ocean core since the natives had yet to reach that place. Shallow sea, mid-sea, deep ocean, and ocean core were the 5 different layers of North Blue and held organisms of different strength. Ocean core, which was somewhat known, extended up to 213,000 meters. The humanity had yet to reach the ocean bed, but it lacked the strength to dive any deeper. The known depth of Earth's ocean was 27,000 meters. In other words, the known depth of North Blue was already 10 times greater. But this wasn't what was the most terrifying, since humanity had already reached 313,000 meters in West Blue. Given these facts, Li Yunmu found it extremely difficult to imagine the vastness of the origin world. Just North Blue was so deep and immeasurable that even the natives were helpless. But all of this didn't have much relation to Li Yunmu for the time being. He only knew that hacking 24 hours a day every day in the boundless North Blue wasn't too difficult. Given that an extra shadow was participating in the hacking now, the harvest of experience and ability points had increased, paving the way to the 20 million experience points. Once he collected that much, he could congeal the 10th shadow. According to Li Yunmu's estimate, it wouldn't take long. If he continued to hack without pausing, it would take him around a month to reach his target. This was the disparity between Earth and the origin world. If Li Yunmu hacked unceasingly in the 5th dimension, God only knew how long it would have taken him to accumulate the 10 million experience points for his 9th shadow. Half a year? Maybe even more. He didn't know. The present circumstances were different, however, which led to both good and bad things. The amount of natural resources in the origin world were endless, and he could conceal his secrets better. But after spending so many days here, Li Yunmu discovered that there weren't any dimensional crystals in this world. His shadows had killed countless sea beasts, but not even a single of them had formed a dimensional crystal. This was a problem. If the origin world didn't have any flux crystals for flux experts, then how did they exist in this world? It couldn't have just born out of nowhere, right? Li Yunmu wasn't without hope, though. He was certain that since his Earth plane and the origin world were connected, then the energy components had to be linked together. Even if he hadn't discovered any flux energy crystals, this didn't mean that they didn't exist in the origin world. This world also had to have the space elements which Li Yunmu desperately needed. The reason he couldn't find them had to be because his experience and understanding of the origin world was too lacking, and that's it. This point should gain some clarification after Demon returned. As for the 10.76 million ability points which Li Yunmu had amassed, he decided not to use them for the time being. He wanted to wait for a good opportunity before using them all up. Apart from this, the system had once mentioned that after it had been upgraded to the 10th level, it could provide another energy unit to increase his cultivation. It would be different from ability points. This type of higher level energy source, which was the goal of quasi-deities, could advance the flame thunder energy which Li Yunmu now cultivated. Therefore, he had already started collecting his ability points in advance. Once the system was upgraded to the 10th level, he planned to exchange these ability points for the higher level energy. Since all quasi-deities chased after it, he decided to call it divine energy for the time being. 2 days passed without Demon returning on their agreed date. During them, Li Yunmu came to a conclusion that Demon must have met with some accident. But on the dawn of the 3rd day, a man wearing torn and bloody clothes walked into the fisherman village with unsteady steps. When the sick old woman and children left behind to take care of the houses carefully inquired about his persona, they realized that he was one of 3 people who had entered their village half a month ago. Thus, they instantly delivered the seriously injured Demon to Li Yunmu's wooden house. What exactly happened? Fortunately, you possess Ghost King's constitution, otherwise, given how seriously injured you are, you wouldn't have made it this far. The moment Li Yunmu saw him, he took out the dark spirit pill given to him by Battle Sage Vega before descending. He used it forcefully pull Demon from the gates of hell. Demon swallowed the pill, and the formidable efficacy of the healing medicine kicked in. His condition stabilized, but he had already lost a lot of blood. If a lot of supplement wasn't used, his recovery would be very slow. While returning, I was attacked by a mysterious group. I have a suspicion that they are the same as us, but they certainly aren't from our Earth. You encountered descenders from another plane. Li Qinghong came over with a glass of water and handed it over to Demon. Correct. They were using flux energy, and not this world's origin energy used by the flux experts. But the power used by one of them was quite strange. It caused my Ghost King body's recovery power to lose effectiveness. If not for the Dark Spirit Pill, I would have found it difficult to recover. When Demon talked about the descenders from another plane, a hint of killing intent appeared on his face. On Earth, he had never eaten a loss to the point that he was almost killed. If not for ghostly image substitution, perhaps he really wouldn't have been able to escape. How powerful were they? How many of them were there? Did they also appear in the Azure Dragon Town? Li Yunmu was extremely astonished. Blue Moon Island was only a third-rate power in the origin world, and there were several hundred such powers in North Blue. Azure Dragon Island was one of many such islands under the control of Blue Moon Island. He truly hadn't anticipated that he would encounter another group of descenders in such a place. Very formidable, their group had 3 males and 4 females. The person who attacked me was one of the males. If I hadn't quickly withdrawn my 4 sea devil monkeys, then all of my beasts would have probably suffered a deadly blow. Also, that male wasn't their leader, but just one of the followers. I had no chance to counterattack, yet their leader was even more powerful. When I sensed his presence, he gave off a sensation of being a king among those on the same level, his power deep and immeasurable. Our troubles have just begun. When Li Yunmu and Li Qinghong heard this, they almost lost their minds. This level of strength definitely surpassed that of Li Qinghong and was almost equivalent to Zhang Wei when he had swallowed Battle God's blood and activated Battle Devil. And this was just the strength of one person out of 7. It only made sense then that the leader who suppressed the 6 would be a person with strength equal to that of Li Yunmu. In any case, their arrival is proof that there is something strange about Blue Dragon Island. Otherwise, Battle Sage and Jing wouldn't have sent me here. Our path is correct. As for your troubles, Li Yunmu suddenly smiled. On Earth, he wasn't afraid of trouble, and after coming to the origin world, he was even less afraid of it. On the contrary, he wanted to see just how powerful were the descenders of other planes. Chapter 337, Damaged Foundation. Demon's encounter with the descenders of another plane had birthed a hint of wariness in Li Yunmu and allowed him to come to a realization. Within the origin world, they weren't going to end up confronting only the powerful natives, but also the descenders from other 65 planes. Li Yunmu wasn't sure why the quasi-deities were absolutely certain that the other descenders would be their enemies and not friends. However, since the people at the top of the pyramid thought so, there had to be a reason for it. Perhaps the 66 planes had hostile relations which couldn't be resolved? Li Yunmu clearly understood one fact at this moment. The natives of the origin world were formidable, but they weren't bound to be enemies, while the other descenders were certainly enemies. After the event, Demon rested for many days until he gained a bit of strength. His trip to Azure Dragon Town wasn't completely in vain, though. He had gained some information during his time there. That information provided a lot of understanding about the structure and composition of the origin world to the 3 of them. First, if they wanted to enter Blue Moon Island, they had to fulfill 2 conditions. One of them was that their physical strength had to reach the power of 9 oxen. Second, their age couldn't surpass 30. The younger they were, the higher potential they had. Regardless of whether it was Li Yunmu, Demon, or Li Qinghong, all 3 of them fulfilled the 2 conditions. After adapting to the gravity of the origin world, the physical strength of the 3 had gradually increased. On their Earth, they wouldn't have been able to achieve this because the environment there wasn't as harsh as that of the origin world. After entering the island hall, under usual circumstances, the hall master would choose 3 qualifiers every day and send them to Blue Moon Island where it would choose some of them. The condition to obtain the 3 spots was to personally defeat the Hall Master. As for the riddle about the difference between flux experts here and Earth's fluxers, which had always left Li Yunmu perplexed, they had also gotten an explanation for it. The answer surpassed everyone's expectations. In fact, given the information which Demon obtained, there wasn't much of a difference between the two. The main thing was there was some slight difference in the number of flux points and the energy required to open them. This came to be because the people here had to survive in the harsh environment of the origin world. After several generations, differences began to appear in the genes of the natives and Earth's humans. Therefore, their flux points were much stronger and durable compared to the humans from Li Yunmu's Earth, and also much broader. Thus, the amount of flux energy that could be poured into their flux points as well as the accumulated strength was naturally much higher. For instance, if a fluxer from Earth opened a flux point, they would gain access to 1 more unit of flux energy. However, the flux experts of the origin world whose flux points were innately more powerful could store 3 units of flux energy by opening a single flux point. As for the exact differences in their bodies, this couldn't be investigated accurately without Demon involving himself too deeply into this matter. The second major difference between the humans of the 2 planes was the number of flux points. Within the origin world, flux points cultivated by a flux expert weren't the same 72 as practiced by everyone on Earth. Rather, the contribution to each power decided the cultivation. Within the origin world, it wasn't just potential and aptitude which decided the allocation of natural resources. There was an even more pragmatic method to it. It rested on the power of contribution points. When a person joined a local power, they could exchange their contribution for a cultivation method to open a particular layer's flux points. The flux experts in the origin world could open 108 flux points in total. When Li Yunmu and Li Qinghong heard this from Demon, both of them were stunned silly. This was a foundational difference in cultivating between the people of the origin world and their Earth. In general, even if the cultivation systems of both worlds were identical, their starting lines were far too different. The natives of the origin world could open 108 flux points while the people of their Earth could only open 72. There was a disparity of full 36 flux points between the two. Surprisingly, the number of points which the people of Earth lacked was exactly 1/3 of the total number of flux points. Because of this, regardless of how hard the people from other planes tried or how talented they were, like Flux Ancestor or Battle God, they would still stop at quasi-deity realm. It wasn't that they didn't strive hard enough or that they lacked talent, but their foundations were simply broken from the start. After a long while, Li Qinghong finally managed to clear her head and said with an extremely complicated expression, "I truly didn't expect that we had fallen behind right at the start. That one step means that we will always lag behind." Whichever descenders learned that the people of their native plane were inferior to the people of another plane from the start, would probably feel the same sense of despair. This feeling was like akin to that of a person growing up and realizing that their parents had been in a weaker position compared to those of other people since the start. At that moment, the perfect image of the parents in their hearts would immediately shatter. Fortunately, Li Yunmu and his 2 followers weren't children and had walked up to here step by step with staunch determination, so they quickly accepted the truth about their Earth having always been inferior to the origin world. According to Demon's investigation, the difference between flux experts and fluxers wasn't large, because they all followed the same cultivation system. Because the body composition of people from different worlds was different, the amount of flux energy they could accumulate was different, but that was it. The fact that natives of the origin world had access to more flux points than people of their Earth wasn't much of a problem. As long as one earned enough contribution points, they could exchange them for cultivation methods to open more flux points. In the origin world, the lowest foundational cultivation method for opening flux points was exactly for 72 flux points. Each next 12 flux points formed another layer. 84 flux points opening method was considered a mid-level opening method. 96 flux points opening method was considered as high-level opening method. 108 Flux points opening method was considered as pinnacle level opening method. There were 4 layers in total. As long as one had enough contribution points, they could exchange them even for the pinnacle level flux points opening method. According to rumor, only when one had practiced the pinnacle level opening method could they be regarded as possessing the right to reach the top and become a deity. Otherwise, even if they had cultivated the high-level opening method to open 96 flux points, they would only be able to reach quasi-deity level at most. Chapter 338, Reversal Day. Time continued to pass, and another month was over in a blink of an eye. One day, the atmosphere among the residents of Azure Dragon Town was exceptionally lively compared to ordinary days. All of them appeared to be in high spirits as if celebrating New Year. The desolate air of being stuck in the same loop day after day every day had completely disappeared. Early in the morning, the large clans and residents of the town woke up ahead of their usual schedule and hurried toward the only divine building in the island together. The few females of rich families who rarely dressed up were moving around in groups of 2s and 3s while adorning stunning attires. It wasn't just the residents of the town, though. Even the people from the 4 fishermen villages had also hurried to the town in large numbers. If there was a satellite or dimensional space eye or any similar technology, this situation could be easily discovered by anyone watching through the omniscient view. At this moment, it was as if honey had suddenly appeared at the center of the town, and the people of the entire island were rushing toward it from all 4 directions. On this day, Island Hall was the main character. This was because today was the day of the once a year in the origin world. This day, which was known as Flux Expert Day, was held by all the powers with unity regardless of how they viewed one another. Flux Expert Day was also known as Reversal Day by the natives of the origin world. It was viewed as the cradle of warriors by the people of all social classes. On this day, it was foreordained that the fates of many people would change. The slaves and civilians viewed this day as a chance to reverse their futures. As for how much they would be able to change their lives on this day, it all depended on how they had prepared. Apart from this, many unmarried women of the large clans used this day to choose their future husbands. Naturally, landowners that were bourgeois or even officials used this day to attract formidable physical flux experts who showed potential, and even some flux experts with their wealth. Those people would then act as protectors of their clans in the form of honored guests or guards. Have you heard? A ferocious person has appeared in West Fisherman Village this year. It's said that he's innately extraordinary, possessing godly power. Even though he is only 20 years old, he already possesses the strength of 32 oxen. Good God, the status of West Fisherman Village will definitely increase. Yes, I don't know what sort of good fortune West Fisherman Village possessed to have gained such a guy. In the future, our 3 fishermen villages perhaps won't be able to contend against West Fisherman Village. AI, our future days don't seem easy. Why stop only at not easy? You family has already released information that after Flux Expert Day passes, the family will take him as the husband of their eldest daughter. That man reached heaven in one step. Before long, the area outside the door of Island Hall at the center of the island filled with people of all social classes. Among this group, there were many who were discussing the ferocious character of West Fisherman Village, who was known as Pan Shan. Being innately extraordinary, he had already beaten all the opponents in the nearby 18 islands by the age of 20. For others, the innate limit of physical strength was the power of 9 oxen, but because of something going wrong with his body, that youth possessed the power of 32 oxen. His fists and kicks possessed the power to cut through mountains. According to rumor, he was a talent which appeared only once in hundreds of years in the entire territory controlled by Blue Moon Island. Therefore, this Pan Shan's future was already determined. It was no wonder then that as the only officials in the island, Yu family chose to sacrifice their eldest daughter to recruit this youngster who belonged to the lowest class. Ah, what a pity, the eldest daughter of Yu family is such a beauty. I dream of her sometimes. Pa, you should stop dreaming, the eldest miss of Yu family is like an immortal fairy. How could a trifling bourgeois like you think about her? Soon, the discussions among the people strayed further and further from the topic. Once the eldest daughter of Yu family was mentioned, all the talks became centered around her. After all, exceptional beauties was a topic which everyone liked to talk about the most since ancient times. As for the extraordinary talented Pan Shan whom they were previously talking about, all of that had no relation with these ordinary people. Apart from discussing, these people knew that they weren't able to change the reality and quickly remembered of their status as spectators. But the heart of Li Yunmu, who was also silently standing in the group, jolted violently. Power of 32 oxen? What exactly did this number imply? Even if he had already accepted that the natives had innate superiority, but a person who was so extraordinary that he possessed the power of 32 oxen was so out of bounds of possibility that Li Yunmu was no longer certain whether that guy could still be considered human. The power of 32 oxen meant the strength of 32 tons, so how could a human possess it? Even if he was a native, the upper limit of base human strength couldn't possibly reach this level without practicing any body refining methods. This terrifying level of strength was truly frightening. Just one of his punches would possess a strength of more than 100 tons, and one kick would be like an enormous mountain. How could anyone resist it? At this moment, Li Yunmu was overjoyed at his foresight. He, Li Qinghong, and Demon had been waiting for a long time for this day, but the three of them had calmly reached a decision to not place all of their eggs in the same basket. Thus, Li Qinghong and Demon left Azure Dragon Island through the transfer channel, leaving the territory of Blue Moon Island. Li Qinghong's goal was the Dragon Mountain Island, while Demon went to Submerged Sun Island. Li Yunmu in the meantime continued with their previous plan to enter Blue Moon Island. In other words, his group of three had decided that each of them would enter three powers in the vicinity of each other. This way, they would be able to easily obtain intel from each other. Until then, the plan had proceeded without a hitch. Li Yunmu was convinced that given Li Qinghong's strength, she would certainly be able to enter Dragon Mountain Island. If nothing unexpected happened, then Demon was also likely to proceed without any difficulties. What Li Yunmu hadn't expected was that he would be the one to encounter something unexpected before the formal test had even begun. At this time, a group of people appeared not far from him. Each and every one of them smelled of fish as they tried to avoid the crowds. There was no need for much introduction to these people. They were definitely fishermen from one of the four villages. After spending the past few months among fishermen, Li Yunmu was extremely familiar with this unique odor. Look, it's the people of East Fisherman Village. But what are they thinking by bringing so many people here, even women and children? Oh, you mean you don't know about this? I heard that a group of outsiders appeared in their village not long ago. All of them are very powerful and they want to enter Blue Moon Island, someone whispered in answer. Chapter 339, The Difficulty in Entering the Island. What a joke, is Blue Moon Island so easy to enter? Even if Pan Shan possesses strength of 32 oxen, he might still not prevail over Hall Master. The people of the town were all aware about the condition for entering Blue Moon Island, which was to defeat the local Hall Master. What sort of people were Hall Masters? They were higher-level flux experts who were just a step away from entering the realm of flux master experts. Thus, although on Flux Expert Day every subservient island's Hall Master could recommend 3 people to Blue Moon Island, these spots weren't usually filled. This was because prevailing over Hall Masters was simply too difficult. The reward worth focusing on was actually the qualifications to enter the outer sect. In other words, to take a step back and become an outer disciple of Blue Moon Island by defeating 3 disciples of Hall Master. I'm really not lying. Those outsiders from East Fisherman Village have already opened their flux points and possess the power of flux experts. Since the very start, they declared that they'll fight for East Fisherman Village and obtain all 3 inner disciple spots, the previous person said with indignation. However, the majority of residents still weren't convinced. The Hall Master of Azure Dragon Island was quite famous among the Hall Masters of all the islands under the control of Blue Moon Island for his extraordinary combat strength. But Li Yunmu did not doubt the speaker. When he observed the people of East Fisherman village orbiting around one man and two women like stars around the moon. If his guess wasn't wrong, then that man and two women should be the descenders from another plane who had attacked Demon. However, it appeared that of the 3 men and 4 women, only 1 man and 2 women had showed up here. As for the other 4 people, Li Yunmu wondered where they could be. Could that group have had the same thought process as him and had sent their companions to infiltrate the other nearby islands? He could imagine that in the future, this group would definitely become his mortal enemies. But Li Yunmu wasn't anxious. At the moment, he just wanted to see what the disparity between the strength of Earth's fluxers and descenders from other planes. Since that group had been chosen to descend, then their strength would represent the most talented youths of their plane. People were coming in one after another, but after a while, it was already time for the formal challenge of Flux Expert Day to begin. The residents of Azure Dragon Town and the 4 fishermen villages spread out as spectators. At some unknown time, the number of spectators had already crossed several thousand, but there were still more coming. This was the first time after coming to the origin world that Li Yunmu witnessed such a large number of natives gathered together. It could be said that more than half of the population of Azure Dragon Island had showed up. The first person to appear on stage was someone that everyone had expected, the 3rd disciple of Hall Master, Pan Tu. He was mainly responsible for battling the challengers who wanted to enter the outer sect. Under ordinary circumstances, as long as a challenger could last against him for 3 minutes without suffering defeat, they would obtain the qualifications to step onto Blue Moon Island and become one of the outer disciples. Although Pan Tu wasn't a genuine flux expert, he cultivated a body refining technique and possessed the strength of 12 oxen. Compared to those who hadn't cultivated any body refining cultivation methods and only had the strength of 9 oxen, his power was stronger only by 3 oxen. This might make it seem as if there wasn't a great disparity in terms of power, but he also cultivated a fighter skill known as Steel Breaking Hand. It was said that he had already achieved minor success in Steel Breaking Hand. His hands were like iron and steel, able to cut through mountains. Resisting blades with bare hands wasn't the least bit difficult for him. After cultivating to a major threshold, he could even cut through steel, as stated in the name. Thus, Pan Tu's strength was truly not something to be underestimated. He was much more formidable than the leader of 9 Dragon Cave, because he cultivated a body refining technique. Just this one point made the leader of 9 Dragon Cave inferior to Pan Tu. No one would be more clear than Li Yunmu about the strength of someone who cultivated a body refining cultivation technique in addition to a fighter skill. This was the first time that he had met someone who not only cultivated a fighter battle skill but also a body refining technique. It could be seen that Pan Tu's whole strength was concentrated in his hands, so they could definitely be compared to a high-level destructive tool. If Demon encountered him and didn't use the 4 sea devil monkeys, then who would die in the end would be uncertain. When Li Yunmu saw Pan Tu, his heart immediately sank. He had a feeling that he wasn't able to keep up with the changes. Given this Pan Tu's strength, Demon would probably find it impossible to become an inner disciple. With the 3 disciples of a Hall Master being this formidable, Demon would probably exhaust all his strength just to become an outer disciple. The strength of the natives of the origin world truly surpassed one's imagination. Just a physical flux expert on an island under the control of Blue Moon Island was this powerful, so God only knew how powerful would the Hall Master who was a genuine flux expert be. This was a psychological blow to Li Yunmu. The strength of the natives of the origin world had left him astounded once more. Come, anyone who thinks that they can become an outer disciple of Blue Moon Island can challenge me. From atop the stage, Pan Tu calmly invited his challengers. After this, the people of the island began to challenge him. They had been waiting for this reversal day which came only once a year for a long time. Among the challengers, the majority were the elite members of the fishermen villages. All of them were one-of-a-kind experts in their own villages and were also the guards there. Clearly, these guards weren't willing to spend their whole lives as guards, they wanted to advance another step. As long as they became outer disciples of Blue Moon Island, they would gain the opportunity to earn contribution points. Once they earned sufficient contribution points, they could obtain a flux point opening method and turn into a dragon from a carp by becoming a genuine flux expert. But there were also descenders from other planes like Lee Yun-mu. They were becoming more and more restless to become members of Blue Moon Island. However, reality is cruel. Under the savage attacks of Pan 2, more than 10 people had went up on the stage in the last hour, but in the end, not one managed to beat him or last for 3 minutes under his attacks. Even if Pan 2 had been fighting continuously with them, not a single person was able to pass. The best performance so far had been 2 minutes and 50 seconds, just short of success by 10 seconds. Although this wasn't enough to become an outer disciple of Blue Moon Island, but the man successfully attracted the interest of many large clans in the town. They surrounded him, trying to attract him to become a protector of their clan. At the 30th bout, a person from South Fisherman village was able to last under Pan 2's hands for 4 minutes. This man instantly became everyone's focus. His display even tempted a few large clans to offer their daughters in marriage to him, but under the support of fellow villagers, he declined all of them, insisting on becoming the outer disciple of Blue Moon Island. At that time, Lee Yun-mu was then given another example on how important was the status of a flux master in the origin world. Just a physical flux expert had caused several bourgeois class clans to fight among themselves in an attempt to rope him in. Chapter 340, Hall Master's Assassination. Blue Moon Isle was a relatively lower starting point compared to the entire origin world, but this sort of low-level environment was already causing the descenders to feel pressure. When the group of other plane descenders saw Pan 2's strength not weakening even after facing 30 challengers, a grave expression appeared on their faces. It seemed that it wasn't only Lee Yun-mu's side which had gravely underestimated the strength of real flux masters. The descenders of other planes had also made this error. Exposure to real combat informed the descenders that when a native of the origin world practiced a body refining cultivation method, they would become frightening. Not only would their physical bodies become even more tyrannical, their endurance would also be increased greatly. If a body refining technique was given to a fluxer on Lee Yun-mu's Earth, then even after cultivating for a few years there might not be any substantial increase in their strength. But what if it was given to a native of the origin world with their innately formidable body? After going through his experiences, Lee Yun-mu discovered that the physical experts who hadn't cultivated body refining techniques and those who had were on completely different levels. If a physical flux expert cultivated an offensive technique, he could display their formidable power, while they cultivated a body refining technique, they could thoroughly exploit their formidable body. Explosive power, resistance, nimbleness, endurance, and even regeneration as well as meticulous control over physical strength would get upgraded by a lot. Pan 2's power was only 3 oxen greater compared to 9 Dragon Cave's leader, which didn't seem very large. However, after witnessing everything personally, Lee Yun-mu felt dread toward the natives. An ordinary body refining technique could exploit the gene concealed within their bodies, which was something the people of his Earth couldn't accomplish. Pan 2 successively faced 50 challengers in front of several thousand people. By then, 3 people had lasted long enough under his hands. The second one was actually a slave that belonged to the lowest class. From that moment onward, that lowest class slave would succeeded in changing his destiny. One of the other was an outsider. He successfully grabbed the opportunity and gained the qualifications to become an external disciple of Blue Moon Island. I will take the stage next. Those who can last in front of me for 3 minutes will not only become the outer disciples of Blue Moon Island, but will also be allowed to choose an offensive physical skill from Island Hall which will give them a chance to struggle against other outer disciples. After Pan 2, the next person to come on the stage was the second disciple of Hall Master and was called Suoye. He also cultivated a body refining technique and possessed the strength of 12 oxen. He cultivated an offensive technique which was called Wind Cleaving Kick. It could be said that his strength was almost the same as that of Pan 2, but then why would a person challenging him have the opportunity to obtain a physical offensive skill? That person would then gain a way to step on the road to progress on Blue Moon Island. The reason for this was because Suoya's offensive skill was a kicking technique. Just as the name suggested, his kicks were extremely fast and ruthless, to the extent that they could cleave through wind. Although his attack wasn't as sturdy and strong as that of Pan Tu's steel hands which could resist against metal blades, it shouldn't be forgotten that the explosive power of thighs surpassed the power of arms by 3 to 5 folds. If a kicking technique was cultivated to a high level, then achieving 10 times more power with a single kick than a punch wasn't impossible. Therefore, although Suoya only had the power of 12 oxen, his one kick which reached more than 100 tons was extremely frightening. And wind-cleaving kick was as fast as its name suggested. When used by a physical flux expert who had a powerful body, this skill's strength could be displayed to a frightening level. This offensive kicking skill, which was fast and ruthless as well as powerful, allowed the user to display power close to that of a homing missile. When Suoya took the stage and began challenging people, the fights became even more intense. After a day of Suoya fighting against several tens of people, only one person was able to last for 3 minutes under him by relying on his physical strength. Perhaps if even Lee Yunmyu had been on stage, he wouldn't have been able to resist a kick with more than 100 tons of power without using his terrifying defense. Often, the reason why Lee Yunmyu prevailed when many others would have fallen was because of his terrifying defense. Since the second disciple of Hall Master was already this formidable, Lee Yunmyu couldn't help turning serious. Soon, the first disciple of Hall Master appeared. His name was Suo Lei, and he was an older brother to Suoye. He cultivated a body refining technique in addition to cross-cover armor and a fist skill called Day Killing Fist. Apart from this, he had also learned an explosive footwork. Altogether he had cultivated 2 offensive physical skills, 1 footwork, a physical cultivation method, and possessed strength of 15 oxen as well as a body refining technique and a defensive physical skill. In general, he had developed all fields. Even the 3 other plain descenders of East Fisherman village couldn't help but take in a deep breath. After witnessing Pan Tu and Suoya's strength, the 3 other plain descenders didn't dare to look down on the strength of physical flux experts. Those who can last against me for 3 minutes will be free to enter Island Hall and choose a physical cultivation method, a physical offensive skill, a martial footwork. Suo Lei was bald and meters tall. Although given his body size he didn't seem very strong, he had clearly cultivated his body to a higher level, thus his body wasn't as shocking as that of Suoya or Pan Tu. Once he finished his speech, a commotion rose among the spectators below. How can the rewards offered by Hall Master be so generous this year? You know, in past few years, they had only offered an offensive skill and a martial footwork. Heavens, this year they are even offering a cultivation method, it is incredible. However, Suo Lei wasn't finished yet. He spoke up once more in a profound voice which was like heavenly thunder rolling around. This year, I will also be representing Master. If you want to enter Blue Moon Island's inner sect, you will have to beat me. What? Then what about Lord Buletin? Why isn't he appearing to battle today all of a sudden? Suo Lei's words triggered a great upheaval. Buletin was the Hall Master of Blue Moon Island who was regarded as the protector of Azure Dragon Town. His sudden disappearance caused many town residents to become anxious. 1 month ago, Master was faced with an assassination attempt by an unknown enemy and passed on. How is that possible? Hall Master Lord Buletin was so formidable, who could have injured him? Impossible, absolutely impossible. Subconsciously, Lee Yunmyu took a glance at the 3 other plain descenders standing not far from him. At this moment, he realized that his previous conjecture was probably wrong. The reason behind why only 3 out of 7 had come wasn't because they had scattered to nearby islands, but that they had went to assassinate the Hall Master together, and 4 of them had gotten killed. Lee Yunmyu instinctively felt that this was the truth of the situation.